What do I need to do in an emergency? I don't necessarily have coworkers. I don't have a basement to go to if there's a tornado, or, what would happen if there was a fire.
We can do a lot to help by staying calm, by being a voice of reason. There's a joke out there that people with disabilities are really good at planning. Well, most times we are because we have to be, and sometimes our peers are not as good at planning.
Hey everyone, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. My name is Robin Ennis, a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Colorado, and I'm here with my co-host Beth Gustin, a licensed professional counselor also in the state of Colorado. And we're coming with you today with a very relevant topic, focusing on emergency disasters, especially with the fires that have been happening in California and the freezing temperatures across the nation. We thought that it would be a good discussion to have, especially for people who haven't already thought of a plan, how to prepare yourself. And you can't be fully prepared, but it's good to put thought behind it. And so we're going to talk about what does having a plan look like, what physical and mental tolls that these types of disasters can take on a person. So definitely tune in.
Yep, absolutely. It's really hard to know everything you might need for every single emergency you might encounter, but the more prepared you can be, the less anxiety you will hopefully have in an extremely anxious event. And so when I think about emergency preparedness, no matter what the disaster might be, I think about things that you need to survive for at least 3 to 5 days. So I'm thinking things like medications. I'm thinking clothing. I'm thinking if you have pets or service animals, you need to have food and maybe a comfort item for them. Those types of things are some of the initial basics you might need. Also, you're going to probably want to take with you all of your important papers, like your ID, passport if you have one, birth certificate, social security card, those things, just in case you need to prove you are who you say you are to receive any services you might need after an emergency, depending on, God forbid, you've lost your home in a fire or a hurricane, or if it's sub-zero temperatures, you want to think about a blanket or those heat reflective blankets or those foot and hand warmers, things like that that you can relatively easily pack and take with you. And Robin and I and Jeff were laughing before we recorded this because as a person who uses, mobility aid, whether it be a cane or a guide dog or some other device, how do you carry all this stuff and still move around?
Exactly.
If everyone had a big old backpack on the bus, that'd be a problem.
Yeah.
And yet, how do you plan for this? How do you carry these things and make sure you've got them in easy reach if you need them in a hurry?
Yes, exactly. It can be very cumbersome to try and think of everything that you need. And Beth, I can't recall if you had just said this, but also too, I want to add is to have non-perishable foods with you too, just in case, if the power goes out and you don't know how long it's going to go out or how long you're going to be stuck where you are. And it can be very overwhelming to think about these things. Like you said, how we were talking about, okay, so I have all of these things, but how can I be able to carry them, especially if I have mobility aid or if I'm limited in mobility. And so maybe thinking about, okay, if you need assistance, having somebody to help you carry those things ahead of time to a certain location so that you can already have it there just in case, or having multiple things in multiple locations. That can be helpful too. Also, I want to add is making sure that you have a list of emergency phone numbers to call so that you can touch base and keep into contact with the people around you as well as emergency personnel. All of these things are good to think about. And actually, even with emergency personnel, think about, let's say if there's a fire, right? Let's say if the fire department needs to come to your home, how are you going to be able to identify who they are, whether it's asking for their name or what department they're with, just making sure that you know what will make you feel secure when letting somebody into your home or getting assistance from other people. Having that type of contact plan is important too.
I agree. It's also important to make sure you carry an extra battery for your phone if you have one, or at least grab your phone charger so that you can keep your phone powered up as much as you can if there's no power outage. And I'm also thinking about if you live with people, talk to them about your plan for an emergency. So can certain people in your family grab certain items and be quote unquote responsible for them? And then you all meet at a certain place so that you can make sure you grab the most important things that you all would need to take care of yourselves and each other during an emergency if you have to leave your home.
Yeah. And that's something that I've been on a personal note, myself thinking about whenever I move to a different place, whether it's my office building or my home, what do I need to do in an emergency, especially because, I don't necessarily have coworkers in that realm if I'm at the office, or if I'm at home, what does it look like, because I have not a high rise, but I have a person below me. So it's neighbors in close quarters. So I don't have a basement to go to if there's a tornado, or, what would happen if there was a fire? What would my escape route be, especially with me being on the top unit? That's something that I myself admit that I need to be more proactive about, and having a really good concrete plan versus having just sitting there in the back of my mind without actually having to really sit through the details of it, because it really does matter. And honestly, and you never know, because like a couple of weeks ago with the weather, I had a power outage for an hour, and then my Wi-Fi kept going in and out. Well, that caused my alarm system to mess up, which caused my fire alarms to not work, smoke detectors to not work. So everything kind of spiraled, and I wasn't prepared for that, right? And so those things can happen too.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important if you have an office, I know Robin touched on this a little bit ago, having multiple items in multiple locations. So if you do have an office, keeping maybe an extra pair of boots if it's cold, or keeping a blanket, keeping a supply of dog food if you have a service dog, keeping some of these things in your office. So if you can't get home that night, you're going to be okay. I always think it's good to keep snacks on hand, just so that, again, if you need food, you have it, or non-perishables. But keeping it in multiple locations, talking through even with your neighbors. I think about Robin's situation. Talk to your neighbors. If there is a fire, how can you all support each other? What can you do to make sure everyone gets out safely? If you live by yourself and you don't know your neighbors, it might be good to get to know them just enough to know that, hey, if something happens, I've got someone close by I can call on. My brother's across town. In an emergency, I can call him, but he can't get to me quickly. So thinking about who are your closest supports, geographically speaking, that might be able to help if you need it, and you can help them if they need it.
That's true, right? It's a reciprocal type of help. I think that's one thing too, and I'm glad you said that about the reciprocation piece of it, because I know sometimes people who have disabilities don't like asking for help because of the perception of what other people would think about them. But just like, you need help, other people will need help too. So it really is working together.
And don't underestimate the fact that you are extremely helpful as well. This comes up a lot in some of my work with clients who have disabilities. And I think Robin and I don't want to speak for her, but I suspect we've both felt this way too, in the sense of, well, what can I contribute? What can I add? How can I help? And we can do a lot to help by staying calm, by being a voice of reason. There's a joke out there that, people with disabilities are really good at planning. Mm-hmm. Well, most times we are, because we have to be. And sometimes our peers are not as good at planning. And so we can be that person that does preemptively talk about these things and have at least a loose plan in place if you need to activate it.
Very true. I was nodding my head with you, Beth, because yes, I wholeheartedly can agree that I was at that point where, I struggled with asking for help. And I still have those moments, but not as much as, when I was in my 20s and early 30s or so. When I was listening to you, it made me think of, that's a positive, right? The fact that we have to think of everything as a process, because that's one thing that regularly comes up in my sessions is we just have to always plan out, our next step and things. And so, in these types of situations, it can be advantageous. But one thing though, is that I was also too thinking, and I don't know how that would happen, but maybe like emergency personnel should have some type of plan to know who may need assistance in fires or in other natural disasters, who stays by themselves. So I think that could be an added layer, and I don't know how that would carry out, but in terms of being prepared, that the fire department knows ahead of time in certain locations where to focus on, more so to make sure that person has all that they need.
I agree. So as we're winding down this episode, what questions do you have around preparedness? What do you already have in place? What would you want to make sure you have in place that you currently don't? Think about these things and talk to your friends and family and make sure you have a plan. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, the more prepared we can be, the less anxiety we're going to have, because it's going to be an emotionally charged situation and we're going to have a lot of uncertainty and not know a lot of aspects around it initially. It's chaotic. And so the calmer we can stay, the better it's going to go.
Exactly. And I want to go off of the emotions piece of it too. During these types of situations, your emotions are going to be in flux. You're going to have a lot of ups and downs. You may even have survivor's guilt, looking at if there was a fire or a flood and your neighbors lost all of their belongings, but you didn't. So really tuning into yourself where you are at emotionally and mentally, and try, like Beth mentioned, to stay calm, but then also to remember that everybody is in this together. Just because you may have escaped with minimal to no damage or whatever it may be, that's not your fault and that's not your responsibility to carry. What you can do is be a support for yourself and other people around you. That's what you can do.
And have some of these supplies packed ahead of time so you don't have to think about it. Give what you can to others if you can in those moments, but having your own grab and go bag is helpful. And I think Robin's talking about survivor's guilt. It might be a good topic for a future episode. That's a big one. That's a heavy one. And there's a lot to unpack around that.
Yeah, I agree. It is a big one. And so maybe you all could reach out too, knowing that survivor's guilt may be one of our topics. What does that mean to you? And have you been in situations where that has arose? Yeah, we want to hear from you. And so Beth posed those questions earlier. And then also too, if you have any comments surrounding emergency preparedness and what that looks like, definitely reach out by emailing, calling, or chatting with us on Facebook or X. But until next time, take care.
Yes, until next time, stay grounded and take care.
Oh yeah, Wellness Wednesday with Beth and Robin. Gonna settle it down. Oh yeah, get your feet planted on the ground.
For more podcasts with the blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to leave us some feedback, give us a call at 612-367-6093. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.
Wellness and taking care of ourselves. It's all about you and taking care of yourself.
When we share
what we see through
each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the reality
of blind ability.
and the realities of blind abilities.